Good morning. I would like to introduce our very brave panelists today who, there's nothing like sitting in front of a group of 400 people to talk about your deepest, darkest fears related to teaching. So I would like to welcome Vince Bravo, English, Aragon High School, Denise Dreyer from Mills, who's in our office, Bethany Lukash, who's from Burlingame, English, Daniela Quinones, Cappuccino, English, Daniel Guido from Hillsdale High School, Social Science, and Aliza Zimmelman from San Mateo, who's awesome. Oh, I'm going to go sit over here for just a minute. This is a live situation. Anything can happen. This is very scary.
All righty. So I have the first question for our panelists, and this is to briefly describe what have been your light bulb moments with Common Core. Those moments in which you saw its promise or its connection to what you already did in class, and what have been your challenges in regards to implementing CCSS instructional shifts?
So we only have a few mics here, so what we're going to do is just, whoever would like to speak first, we're just going to hand the mic over to you and we can share. So Danny, thank you.
Thank you. I think for me, the big light bulb came when my principal, Jeff Gilbert, said it's a shift from being passive learners for our students to being productive, which in history means they actually have to care now about what they're doing to actually be productive learners. And so for us, it means a shift from CSTs, which may or may not have been culturally relevant to our students, to things that matter to them. So my struggle is going to be, so how do I pick that? Or how does my team decide that? Or is what's going to be decided by the state actually going to be reflective of what our classrooms look like? So that's what I stand.
So I've been teaching in high school for 9 weeks now, so mostly I'm just grateful to still be standing. I'm humbled that I'm on this panel. In regards to the question, when I think of Common Core, I think of practices that we've already had in place for years, like Socratic seminars and fish bowls. And I think of Malala Yousafzai winning Nobel on Friday, and that it is our task, really, in implementing Common Core, to raise up citizens that are not willing to be compliant with the status quo, but are willing to ask questions and push boundaries. And I think that Common Core's emphasis on academic speaking and listening can really help to facilitate that goal.
That's the first time a silent G has been put into my name. So I think one of my light bulb moments happened with when one of my students had a light bulb moment. Last year, I did a fishbowl discussion for my final instead of a multiple choice test, and I gave my students different essential questions from the year, and they had to look through their science notebooks and pick out evidence that helped them answer the question from all the different units. So even if it was a question about evolution, they had to go back and look at something from, I don't know, like meiosis. And I had a student look at me and go, Ms. Coleman, these are all connected. And like, everything's connected to to each other. And I was like, yeah. And I think a lot of my students, they realized when they were doing this project that, everything we were learning, was connected to each other. And I think they really got a higher depth of knowledge than how they just memorize stuff or really just use their academic, test-taking strategies to pass multiple choice tests. So it reached more students than the, top percent of my class that usually passes multiple choice tests. And it really, all my students were really engaging with their notebooks and really figuring out what we had learned over the past, 6 months or a year, however long we've been in class.
For me, an aha moment came when I was literally looking at standards, and I was asking questions and making statements about those standards. As a department, we were looking at standards and we were saying, what do these standards say? And on top of that, what do we want to know about it? And I really thought about the curriculum that I was delivering in English, and really a lot of our shifts in skills to look at research really asks the students to do the same thing. Make some bold statements or claims and ask questions. And work with them to try and figure out how to develop the best questions and develop the best statements. And so we've really spent a lot of time thinking about how to teach kids, students, how to ask questions. They definitely know how to ask questions, but are they the right questions? And then after they've made a statement, can they take a step back and say, is this the right statement, or even question each other?
I think for me in the world language classroom, one of the challenges that Common Core has brought is how do I really keep up the level of rigor for my students when I introduce a text, and also thinking about how do I build that level of academic literacy for my students in the second language, which in my classroom is Spanish. And one of the light bulb moments for me was last year when I was reading through some research about second language acquisition, and I realized that building the student's second language academic literacy really translates to the kids' first language. So for my students, just last week, it struck me again, the light bulb went off when we were reading a complex poem, and one of the questions that the kids were answering in Spanish was something about cómo evade la autora, da, 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 which translates to how does the author evade, da, 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 da. And when I used the word in Spanish, evadir, the kids kind of looked at me and I said, oh, it means to evade. But they kept looking at me. And so then I realized, right, you don't know what it means in English. Okay, so it means this. And so for me, that's a big light bulb moment that I have, several times throughout my lessons, is that I really need to tell them what these rigorous literacy, skills, what these words mean in English, and then that'll translate to Spanish and vice versa. So it's building a second language, but also improving the first language at the same time.
I have a special math question for Denise, actually. Denise is our only math teacher. On this panel, we had one who had to sort of bow last night due to a family emergency. But Denise, what we were wondering about was, one of these major shifts in math is this rigorous pursuit of conceptual knowledge, procedural skills, and application. What does that look like when it happens in the classroom? And what are some of the challenges of getting there? Sorry to hear people.
No pressure.
It's an easy question. Yeah, I think you can do it.
Somehow I think maybe unlike, well, it seems to me unlike the ALA standards, the math Common Core standards are a huge shift from what we've been doing for the last at least 15 years if we're trying to make sure that they all can pass and meet the CST standards, which are lots and lots of little tiny skills and content areas that they needed to be knowledgeable of, but not really proficient in and not in any depth. And so the big shift is how do you get students who are used to memorizing facts and memorizing steps away from that into thinking, what does this really mean? Why am I doing these steps? What are the steps that I could do? How else could I do it? Really pushing that depth of thinking and the critical thinking skills that really have been sort of not emphasized by the math curriculum that we've been dealing with for the last so many years. On a personal level, I'm really happy about that. I've been always interested, my favorite question to ask students is why, explain, support. And the more we go through that and are allowed to be emphasizing that, I think, the better their understanding of the mathematics. And really the most important part is they'll be able to see how they can apply it in life. And they're not going to remember the details and minutiae of geometry theorems, but if they can think critically and support their answers and explain why they think this is the way to do it and compare it to other ways that you could do it, I mean, that's really the power and the lifelong skills that I think Common Core is trying to give students, and especially in the math. Now, the other half of that is the students are really resistant to that, because if they've been successful in math, they're good at memorizing and following the algorithm and knowing what the steps are, and when the problems look all like this one, I can do 10 more just like it. And that's not what life is like. You don't get 10 or 30 problems all the same. So that is the real challenge, I think, as math teachers, but as all teachers.
in this shift.
Thank you. So the next question, as we are working here and designing our instruction and thinking about it, we call on our PLC members. So my next question for you is, what role has your PLC played in your shift in the Common Core instruction? That's Brenda.
I just want to speak on behalf of teachers that are new to high school and saying that I think the PLC model establishes a system that helps keep people afloat when they're new to the game. And I think it really invites everyone to have a seat at the table so that we all feel that our voice is valued and that we're sharing the responsibility of the workload to maximize our efficiency and ultimately do what's best for the students.
There's a running joke at Hillsdale, which PLC? Because we have a lot. And so from each one that I'm in, I just think, like Bethany said earlier, you learn a lot from just already the great practices that are already established. And so people who have been for many years doing things that make students think and engage with critical texts. And so for me, the PLC model's just been, wow, I'm going to go watch them do what they did because it was great.
For me, the PLC's been probably the backbone of the shifts for our curriculum in English, working with colleagues on not only texts that we're familiar with, but also exploring new texts together and developing new curriculum around those texts has been extremely exciting and interesting. Of course, we have enjoyed PLC time once a week when we can. We've also had the pleasure of having a common prep with our PLC a couple of years, for 2 years, which was absolutely amazing to know that we could have time within our day to spend with each other and talk about curriculum, constantly thinking about student output, thinking about student progress, together as a PLC, delivering the same curriculum in a lot of ways, but also looking at the same assessments. For us, a huge shift in English was in addition to our literature adding a lot of research component. And I didn't go to school to do research. I went to school to read poems and novels. And so it was a lot of me learning about how to do research, and I relied on my PLC. Now that we're down to one PLC, there is one PLC each at our site. There is a shift away from some of the work that we had originally done when we had 2 different PLCs. As department head, I encouraged our department to also be a PLC. So our department had time together to talk about what's happening on different levels. So when we looked at a standard, we could look at what the freshmen were doing with the standard, the sophomores were doing, seniors, so we knew what to expect as they progressed. But without the PLC model, there's no way we could develop the curriculum that we're using today.
For me, I am involved in a local PLC, and I'm also in a district PLC where I collaborate with San Mateo teachers and their teachers of Spanish. And I have to say, one of the great things that the PLC has done for me is it goes back to that saying, 2 heads are better than 1. And in this case, it's 3, 4, 5, or 6 heads are better than 1. And we're all in this together. We share all of our resources, our strategies, so I don't feel like I have to figure this Common Core thing out on my own. I don't teach in isolation with the door closed without talking to anybody about, what I'm doing or how I'm getting my student, how I'm going to get them there. We all put our heads together and, talk about the best strategies, and that's what we end up implementing. And I think it works out so much better for our students and their learning, and mine as well.
I think one of the main benefits for me with working in a PLC is that sort of accountability to each other as a group. Without working with other people, I tend to slip into my old patterns and do the same things that I've been doing for the last 20 whatever years I've been doing. And with the PLC, it helps me personally focus on, okay, we made this commitment, we said we were going to look at these standards, we said we we're going to do this assessment, how did it really go? Let's really use that rubric we created, let's really do the next step of talking about who got it, who didn't get it, what are we going to do next. And I think that's really the goal, is the equity for all students. If we're talking together and we're talking about what's important to us, what we want to have happen in our classrooms, then it matters less what teacher a student gets. It's less of a lottery, like did you win or did you lose? They're all going to get the same rigorous standards-based curriculum and the same support to their needs that they're going to need to meet our goals and get the Common Core and be successful.
Just to reiterate, I think that accountability is a really key component in terms of PLC shifting to Common Core. I feel like it's really easy to take a lesson and say, oh yeah, let's move Common Core, ask them a why question at the end. Whereas if you have a PLC or a bunch of people working on developing new curriculum, you really are forced to, I think, interrogate and look at your curriculum and say, does teaching, this content, does it really address this, or should we just get rid of it? So I feel like it makes you really redevelop your curriculum and provides you with the support structures to create new curriculum and new units instead of just kind of trying to squeeze your old kind of curriculum into this concept of Common Core.
Well, thank you. I wish we had more time. We have, many more questions to ask, but I would like to give our panelists a round of applause for their time and honesty.